So a lot of what I talk about is using immersion as a tool for engagement. And that's stuff I've lectured at Google, at Microsoft labs, all over the place, space conferences. It's a really powerful thing. And the idea of immersion, isn't something that's new with VR. Immersion goes back to, Dickens and the great novel. Immersion goes back to shadow plays and all these things. So I'm really open with how we can have this conversation. If you guys just want to ask me questions, we can do it that way. Or if you want, I can kind of take you through kind of like the whole idea of like what is immersive entertainment and why it matters and kind of how you measure it. And then talk a little bit about Game of Thrones, or
can we do a little bit of both? Like, I'd love for them. All of these, majority of these students are seniors, and immersive is a new program. So they're in a new program, which I'm like, of course, going, we can make it what we want. Right. You're an explorer, right? And just do cool shit. And I think they're a little like, how do we get started? Like, where do we go? So if you'd share a little bit about like, how did you get your start? Because I think there might be blown away right now of like all that you've done and what's the zigzag that you did to get there.
Well,
does that sound good, y'all? I think I'm seeing a lot of nods.
Okay. First of all, I got into marketing as a total accident. I lost a bet with my husband. So I was a theater nerd for a long time. I was in a conservatory kind of fame style high school doing method acting at 14 and like, Tennessee Williams shit you should not be doing at 14 because it's like really emotionally disruptive. And, I also was really interested in neurology growing up. My mom is severely dyslexic. I'm super dyslexic. And my mom used to get these terrible migraines, which I also inherited, which were fun. And she would black out when I was a kid. And so people would say, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I'd say, I want to be a neurologist so I can fix my mom's brain. And I had this fascination with how the brain worked from a really young age. And I thought for a long time I wanted to be a doctor. But at the same time, the language that I spoke at home with my dad was the language of movies. And my dad had a super rough childhood, grew up on the south side of Chicago, and movies were his refuge. And this kid at 5 was walking himself to double features to hide, basically. And so he knew that for a quarter, if he could scrounge it together, he could get 2 White Castle cheeseburgers, the double feature movie, and popcorn. And he would stay in these movie theaters for like 12 hours and watch the movies over and over and over again. And like, that was really how he came to see the world and be able to cope with the world. And so I really think something that contributed to my parents' divorce was the fact that my dad and I only spoke in movie quotes. And I think it just drove my mom nuts because she hadn't seen all the movies. So the power of storytelling was really, really apparent to me from a young age as well and growing up. And I clearly remember seeing E.T. with my dad in the theater. It was the first movie I saw in a movie theater. So now you know how old I am. And it was something that was always there. And so like the theater was part of that, as an actor. And what I kind of realized as I was getting towards going to college was that I didn't want to be that vulnerable all the time. That was really hard as an actor. And that it was really destructive for me because I wasn't in an emotional place of maturity to where I could handle going to some of those dark places because I didn't know how to get back. And that was really scary. So I decided I was going to stop doing that, got into Tulane pre-med, was going to go be a neurologist. And I woke up about 2 months before I was supposed to go to college. And I went, oh shit, I want to be a doctor in a movie, not an actual doctor. And there's a massive difference between those things. So I decided that I was going to go to film school instead. And I got into NYU. I was barely turned 17 when I graduated from high school. And my parents were like, you are not going to New York City by yourself. So I ended up going to this tiny little school. I chose the school that was furthest away that gave me the most money to go to college, called Webster University in St. Louis. I was the only girl in the film school. So I basically just demanded the keys from the boys that ran the equipment room. And I just made movies for like 3 years, and it was crazy and awesome. And I met some amazing people, and I double majored in history and film. And I had always wanted to go to USC. And so USC is the only school, by the way, that requires you to take the GRE to go to graduate film school. So for those of you that are thinking about a graduate degree, you should actually study for that test. And they're also the only school that refuses to take any work from a portfolio standpoint. They will only admit you based on a writing sample. So I had made a thesis film that I was really proud of. And back then you could only shoot on film. We didn't have digital consumer cameras yet. And I had sent my film off to Nashville because it was the closest film lab to St. Louis. And I got my film back on SVHS video. And it turned out that the DP had been drinking the whole time we were shooting the movie. And so we would, you'd have these shots, and all of a sudden the camera would dip and people's heads would be cut off and like the whole thing. So I had to apply to graduate film school with a film where people's heads were cut out of the frame half the time, which, you know, doesn't really fly with the top film schools in the country. And so I was terrified I wasn't going to get into graduate school, that my life was over, my dreams were never going to come true, all the things, right? And you know what? I flunked the GRE because I'm terrible at math. Also a reason why I'm not a good DP, because I can't calculate depth of field on the fly. And I didn't get into UCLA. AFI laughed at me because I was 20, and they're like, most of our graduate students are 30 and above. And I was like, well, there's no way I'm getting into USC. My life is over. And lo and behold, I did. And when I got to USC, it was really this amazing group of people that everybody just wanted to tell a great story. And I remember one of the first days of class, and the head of the film school said, look around, because these people are going to be who you work with for the rest of your career. And it is so true. So I hope you guys like each other. I hope you get to know each other really well, because you're all going to be working together forever. And that's how this crazy shit is going to start. So I graduated from SC, and to do my thesis project, you have to finance your own at USC. So on top of the crazy amount of money you're paying to go to graduate film school, which, by the way, was more than I would have paid to go to medical school had I decided to become a doctor, I needed a cheap way to graduate and make a thesis. And one of my friends wanted to be a commercial director. So he said, tell you what, let's partner on this. You and I will produce and direct these together. And, you know, we'll graduate with spec commercials. And we were the first people to ever do this at SC. I had some friends up at ILM that I had worked with when I took the summer off between undergrad and grad school, owed me some favors because I never got paid for a job we did. And these particular commercials had a lot of visual effects in them. So they did them all for free because it was kind of a make good. And those commercials ended up winning the Young Directors Award in Cannes at the Cannes Festival of Advertising that year. And so all of a sudden, my partner and I were in advertising, and I could have cared less. I had no interest in marketing. I was a total snob. I was like, I'm making art. Like, come on, I'm going to do film. Whole thing. He was overjoyed. And I went on my merry way, post-production supervising a bunch of features, because a couple of my friends that graduated a semester ahead of me made Napoleon Dynamite, which won Sundance right before I graduated. And so they got a 3-picture deal, and they were making all these movies, and I was their post soup. So basically I was responsible for everything editorial through release, and I was loving it. And the third movie that I was supposed to do with them got put into turnaround at the studio, which meant I had this gap in my work life for a whole year. And I was like, oh crap, I have to go get a job. And so I answered a job board posting for a post producer for commercials, thinking they're never going to hire me. They want somebody that does feature films. And they hired me on the spot, and it was more money than I'd ever seen, because commercials pay way better than making movies. And all of a sudden I met all of these people in advertising. They were all my clients. And one of those companies happened to be re-headquartering to Boulder, Colorado, which I grew up in Denver. And my husband at the time, who's a really cool guy, his name's Chad. He's a blind magician and a comic book writer. Aaron knows him quite well.
That is awesome.
He was just on Penn and Teller's show. You should Google it because it was great.
It was great.
And he hated LA because, like, as a blind guy, this was before Uber and Lyft. Like, it sucked. And I told him hell will freeze over before there's a job in Colorado that actually does what I went to school for, and I can pay back my student loans. And once this movie fell apart, we looked at each other and we're like, we're too old to ask our parents for money for rent. Like, we have to figure this out. And he said, all right, well, if you don't line up another movie in 2 weeks, you have to call those people that are moving to Colorado and, talk to them about a job. And so I said, I bet you I'm going to line up another movie in 2 weeks. Like, don't worry, we're not moving to Colorado. I lost said bet, ended up calling up this company named Crispin, Porter and Boguski, and I moved to Boulder a month later. And that was really how I got into digital. And digital was, this new tool in the creative toolbox at the time, especially in advertising, of different ways of storytelling and expression. We did this crazy thing called Subservient Chicken, where you could basically make this animated chicken on the web talk and do whatever you wanted for Burger King. Burger King was great because they just gave us all this money to do weird shit. And like all the college guys that like to eat Burger King thought it was hysterical. So they just kept giving us more money. But
they've always been innovative, Burger King.
They totally were. Really quite cool. We made the first ever online tracker for Domino's called the Pizza Tracker while I was there. And I got to work on that. I won the Microsoft account for Crispin with the team. We did this, really interesting kind of human story about like being a PC. It was called I'm a PC, and really humanizing why their technology was so much more accessible, which was something close to my heart. Anyway, did all kinds of this crazy stuff. And then flash forward 10 years, I'm in charge of this department at this company called Saatchi & Saatchi, and our client is Toyota. And when you do truck commercials, it's always about towing stuff or how much you can beat up the truck and it'll survive. And somebody made a snide joke about like, well, aren't we getting a space shuttle? We should tow some space junk. And I said, we have somebody on the board at that museum. And I called him up, and it turned out that the space shuttle Endeavour was coming, in fact, to LA, and they needed to get it to the California Science Center from LAX. And there was a portion that it couldn't go on its regular transporter and had to be towed by a truck. And I said, well, will you let me see if the Tundra can tow it? And he said, sure. To my great surprise, it actually worked. And all of a sudden, we were towing a space shuttle with a Toyota Tundra truck. And I had to drop out of life and become a civil engineer in 6 months. And before I knew it, I was closing streets and lifting power lines and repaving stuff. And
I remember
what's up,
that,
buddy?
Man.
Sorry, my 10-year-old is here doing school.
Hi,
do you want to come say hi to Erin? Ocean's mom.
Hi. Hey, how you doing?
Right,
I hear you loved the election.
He did. He wanted some candy out of my office vending machine. So, we're doing this crazy thing, and, I'm closing the 405. I'm moving a space shuttle. I'm making a Super Bowl spot about it, a documentary, all these things at the same time. And at that point, it really kind of changed my life in this amazing way. And I went, I'm really tired of telling stories that are about products. And so I came back to entertainment, and I got this random phone call, like most things in my career. And they said they wanted to do some digital things with some of the commercials they cut. And so I was prepared to say no. And there's a rule in Hollywood: you always take a meeting. Even if you think you're going to hate it and you don't want to do it, you always take the meeting. So I went with my nice speech prepared to say, well, thank you for thinking of me. I'm very flattered, but that's not what I do anymore. Blah, blah, blah. I can recommend some people. And they sat me down and they said, do you like Game of Thrones? And I said, you have my undivided attention. And before you knew it, I was pitching to the head of HBO a bunch of crazy shit I wanted to do for fans. And you guys are going to love this. I said, okay, who's going to be in the pitch meeting? And they're like, well, Casey Bloys, who's now the head of HBO, and Carolyn, who is the executive producer of the show, and maybe a couple of writers. And so I was so focused on like the people from HBO and the executive producer that, explaining things clearly, because as you guys know, with emerging tech, like not a lot of people know what words you're using. And so you have to break it down and make it really simple, right? And I was talking about an MMORPG, and like, maybe we should make an MMORPG for Game of Thrones because there's so many storylines and so many characters, like it would be really successful. And they were just like, wait, what? And so I'm explaining the concept of an RPG, first of all. And then I'm trying to explain what like a multiplayer online RPG is. And I look over my shoulder at the two writers in the room who were not introduced to me by name, by the way. And I said, you guys are nerds. You know what I'm talking about, right? And they were like, oh yeah, totally. It's at the end of the meeting. Went well. I said, I'm sorry, I didn't get your names. And they were like, oh yeah, we're Dan and Dave. And I was like, oh, cool. Dan and Dave. And I'm like, so you guys are the writers on the show? They're like, yeah, we're the writers on the show. It's like, great to meet you. No idea who they were. So
that's
that
sometimes
was really
the
fun.
best though.
It was perfect. So Dan and Dave and I became three peas in a pod and thick as thieves, creating these experiences that for their fans, that for this amazing show that they had created. And I got to put them in VR for the first time and scare the shit out of them while they were leaning over perceptible ledges and things like that. I put them in the middle of their own main title sequence, which was super fun. Let them fly around either as the Raven or the Dragon. And it was just this really interesting ride that then led to all these other projects. So for about 4 years, I was on the retainer with all the major studios here in Hollywood to basically, they just bought space on my brain like a server, and they would throw titles at me and be like, come up with something insane. I'd be like, okay. And half the time it worked, half the time they ran out of money. And, you win some and you lose some. And then I was really interested in working in tech further. And so after Ready Player One, we had designed this incredible ARG for them, and they chickened out at the last minute. Don't tell them I said that, but they did. And
I would have loved that ARG.
It would have been so cool.
It would have been so cool.
It would have been so cool. We actually buried a QR code in the trailer, by the way, for the ARG, just so you know.
You think it still works, that QR code? I'm going to go back and find it.
I doubt it's still hosted, but anyway, long story short, I kind of needed a break from entertainment because my heart kept getting broken. So I took a job as the head of global brand for Eventbrite, which is a ticketing company. You guys probably all used it. A total left turn and absolutely hated it. Spent a year living in San Francisco, commuting back and forth to LA, but I learned so much.
I was going to say, every time I talked to you, you were on a plane.
Yeah, pretty much. It was a really miserable experience in a lot of ways, and mostly because they had hired me to come in and humanize their technology. And once they realized what that meant, I think they kind of were like, yeah, we just wanted you to like change the color orange for the E. And I was like, oh, okay, I can do that too. But a lot of what all of this work required was a ton of research and understanding of human insights and what makes people tick and why. And so, a lot of that is neuroscience and behavioral psychology. So I don't have a degree in either of those things. I probably will never get one. But I know a lot of neuroscientists and I know a lot of psychologists, and they've all given me some really great books to read, which I'm happy to share a few of those with you guys that are a big part of the secret sauce. I spent a lot of time hanging out with behavioral economics professors because they really understand how people's actions belie their words. And that's a big part of when you're constructing something for entertainment, is really understanding what people are going to do, not what they're going to say. And that's what, certain emotional triggers can trigger certain behaviors. And that's a huge part of designing immersive experiences and designing interactive experiences, because it doesn't matter what people say, it's what they do. And so then Amazon came knocking while I was working for Google. as a consultant, and I turned them down 3 times. I didn't really love any of the jobs that they brought to me. And then they called me back about a year later and said, okay, we finally think we have the right job for you. And that's what I'm doing now. So that was like a 20-minute version of my life. I'm sorry if it was boring. Are there any questions? Okay.
Go ahead. Introduce yourself, Logan.
Hi, I'm Logan. I'm actually a graduate student over in the Department of Theater and Dance studying integrated media design, which is fancy word for we play with projections and graphics and stuff.
Cool.
And I'm just really curious, also from Colorado. How fun.
Right.
Hell yeah. I guess I'm really curious, like, I'm not convinced right now that like advertising is super sexy, just because I am more in like this entertainment, like let's make art and stuff. Like, how do you shift your brain into like, let's make this creative and fun while you're on like an advertising job?
Well, I think you have to understand the objectives, and that's not something that a lot of advertising always does well. So like, what is it that you want the customer to do, right? And so if you start there with like, what is the behavior that we want to elicit through this? There's a lot of different ways that you can get to that behavior. The fun part and the creative part and the part that can actually be elevated to art is how you decide to do that. And so for me, it's about the challenge of figuring out how to manipulate the behavior. And has a really negative connotation, but if you look at it in its true form of the definition, it's just getting people to take certain actions at a certain time, right? That's what manipulation is. So creating the right kind of cognitive state for people to take in the experience or the content that you're creating for them, and then take an action based on that. I mean, not all advertising is created equal. You're not going to be excited about every opportunity that's put in front of you. You know, I've certainly worked on clients and brands and products that, you know, I'm like, meh, it's not that great. You know, and it's always easy to sell something everybody loves. It's easy to sell Game of Thrones. Everybody loves the show, right? It's a lot harder when you're trying to sell something that people, A, don't understand, don't think they need, and don't understand the value that it adds to their life. And so the big thing that you have to figure out is, what is that emotional value that people are going to get out of something? So a lot of the time in like user experience design, right, we talk about utility. I don't know how many people have designed websites or have been exposed to some kind of like UX thinking. Okay, so you guys know what I mean, right? You're doing your stakeholder interviews and you're trying to figure out, you know, what is it that we want people to do? What is the utility that's going to be sticky for people, that, you know, they're going to keep this app on their screen or they're going to bookmark this web page, right? Because it provides some kind of value to them. And it's always about that transactional value, right? Well, there's no reason why you can't think about that emotionally too. And so I call it emotional utility. So when I'm doing something for a commercial or a product or some kind of advertising, and I'm trying to figure out how to design an experience for that customer, I'm trying to find that sweet spot of what that emotional utility is for them. So if I'm doing a piece of performance art, what is the emotional value that they're going to take from that makes it sticky, that they then associate with this brand or this thing that has brought them to that then is going to make them take an action next time that they encounter that brand, right? And hopefully what you're doing then is building brand affinity, which over time leads people to create brand loyalty and then to continually repeat the same action, which is either purchasing that product or recommending that product to different people. Was that a helpful answer, Logan?
Yeah, I think that's really like an interesting lens to look through. It isn't essentially like we're just manipulating people. It's actually like how can we tell a story while also being like, hey, this product can help your life, or something like that.
Yeah, it is about telling that story, but you're not telling a story for yourself. Are telling a story to show them the value that it has. And so you're not selling to them necessarily. You are providing them some kind of value through the narrative. And so like one of the best compliments I ever got in my career is when I was working with Chris Nolan on Dunkirk. I don't know if you guys saw that film, but That's a heavy, heavy story, right? And I happened to study World War I in college for my history double major. So I was super, super excited about all this. And, what I had designed for him, he said, this is what I'm talking about. This isn't marketing. He's like, this is bringing them into the story. This is what I want to do for the film. And that's exactly it. It's not about making marketing. It's about creating emotional utility for people and creating emotional value through narrative. And when you do that right, it will meet all the objectives of your marketing. And oftentimes it exceeds them. That's one of the things on Game of Thrones that became really apparent to me when we started is, okay, Dan and Dave said they wanted to do this thing. So HBO just goes, great. How much does it cost? And they write you a check. Because Dan and Dave are Dan and Dave. I mean, they had the Midas touch, right? On Game of Thrones. They could do whatever they wanted. So I had to prove to HBO, though, if I ever wanted to do this again without Dan and Dave and for some other show, that what I was doing actually had value. And so I had to figure out a new way to measure the efficacy of what I was doing by focusing on the emotional and contextual narrative versus something more expected, from an advertising standpoint. And what we found when we did that measurement from an engagement standpoint is that they got a return on their investment 6-1 from what they spent on buying a video ad in a Twitter feed, which was their regular playbook. And so it looked like what we were doing was really expensive. But when you actually looked at the number of people that you engaged in meaningful engagement, not they may or may not have seen this somewhere, but actually engaged with the content actively, the value proposition for what they invested in was massive. So that's a key thing when you're designing an experience is thinking about how am I going to measure this and how am I going to tell the story of how effective it was or what the results were, because it's really great to make cool shit. But if your cool shit can't be quantified as to why it should exist in the world beyond you wanting to express yourself, you're going to have a hard time making money doing this. And, I live in LA. I've got a kid at private school. I'm married to a comic book writer and a magician who I love dearly, but those things don't make a lot of money. And so you have to figure out how are you going to do this in a way that people will pay you for your expertise because you can prove with data that this shit works. And that art works. Art works. People want art. So we just have to show them why and how.
Yeah, I think awesome. I think actually when you think about that, what we talk about with UI about being invisible and intuitive, right? That's for anything with marketing. Where I think it works best is when it is invisible and it becomes story. It becomes that engagement of not a customer anymore, but a fan, right? So audiences thinking about them as fans, which you guys have been doing as you've been doing your own research on understanding audiences' intention of wants, needs, emotions, and motivations. Super important. Other questions for Melissa?
I see a bunch in the chat. I haven't been paying attention to it, but I see there's a whole bunch of stuff.
Oh, here we go. It's so Valkyrie says, in terms of selling a product, service, et cetera, to consumer, especially when reaching out to a disenfranchised group or minority, how do you handle the ethical moral complex of providing those groups with something they genuinely need without being exploitive?
Well, that's actually 3 different questions.
Yeah.
So
break it down, maybe.
Yeah, let's break it down. What is the most important thing that you're asking there is how do you create something for somebody without being exploitative of their needs? Is that accurate?
Valkyrie? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So, I mean, first of all, if you haven't lived that experience, you better be talking to a lot of people that have, Don't make any assumptions. Ask a lot of good questions and get in the room with a lot of people that are, living that experience and understand their needs. So, what is it where's the gap in the market for them? Like, what is it that has been underserved for them traditionally? Emotionally, what has been unrecognized or invalidated, unvalidated by society, or by that particular vertical, I guess, for lack of a better word, that you're working within. So, for example, one of the things that I know we're trying to do on our platform is really try to create content that speaks to Black audiences. We don't have a huge Black audience on our platform, and that's something that is a priority for us. And it's like, if they don't see themselves reflected in the stories on our platform, why would they think this platform is for them? And so instead of making assumptions of, oh, we're just going to get a bunch of Black creators to make Black content, it's really about taking the time to meet with lots of people from lots of different types of Black communities, urban, rural, suburban, and from different segments of the Black community in America. So people that are, East Indian Black, people that are Caribbean Black, all of these different groups, and understand, like, where are the intersections and the crossovers of what they feel like they are not seen or heard, and what are those biggest moments. And then from there, you can start to kind of understand what's missing. And then from what's missing, you can start to say, okay, how do we fill this with something that does, again, go back to having that emotional value, that emotional utility for this particular audience. When you're talking about like a brand, like a product, like an actual thing you go buy off of a shelf versus like entertainment as service, part of that is just really understanding what the value proposition is for them and making sure that you are hearing that accurately and reflecting it back in the product positioning to that particular market. So one of the big things that I try to do always when I'm especially working with people in a culture that is not my own is I repeat back to them what I heard and say, this is what I heard. Did I understand you correctly? And a lot of the time I don't, because I don't have that shared experience with them. And so what I think I hear isn't actually necessarily what they were conveying to me. And so by that discussion and that willingness to be wrong and willingness to not get it right a majority of the time, I'm able to get a much deeper, much more nuanced understanding of what their actual needs and, desires are. I think being exploitative is when you don't listen and you make assumptions. I think that's where a lot of exploitation happens. And I think there are a lot of people with the best of intentions that really think that they're doing something good. But ultimately, if you don't have people participating in the creation of that narrative, you're never going to get it right. And you're not going to get it right for everybody all the time anyway. It doesn't matter how many people you pull in and how many people are co-creators of anything. It's just human, it's just being human. Everybody's experience is different, and there's always going to be somebody that it doesn't hit home for. So it's just about trying to get as much of it right as you can, and then learn from what you didn't get right and what you fucked up, and continually evolve and do better. And that's the great thing about optimization and products and experiences that we design, especially the stuff that's digital. It can change, it can evolve. It isn't finite. Art is never finite. I mean, the second you put it out in the world, it's no longer yours. People are bringing their own experience to it, and that means that it is constantly evolving. And I mean, it's like when you read a book when you're in high school and you take one thing from it, and then you read it 20 years later as an adult, and it has this completely different level of meaning. Like The Fountainhead is a great example for me. Like I remember, my middle name is Anne, but it's Ayn. I'm named after Ayn Rand because my dad was a big fan of hers. And don't judge me for it. He's not a libertarian or an asshole, I promise. But I remember reading that book at 14 for the first time. And I don't know, it's 9 pages in. And he's sitting there talking to the dean of architecture in the book. And he says, like, well, who's going to let you make buildings like this? And he says to him, it's not who's going to let me, it's who's going to stop me. And I remember in my 14-year-old brain crystallizing that moment and being like, that's what being an artist is. And like the conviction of that was really important to me. Well, then I reread that book years and years later. And while that still stood, there were some really fucking disturbing things in the relationships between some of those characters that completely went over my head at 14, you know? And that's the beautiful thing about art. And that's the beautiful thing about the experiences that we make. Like, because of how that changed based on my own narrative and my own lived experience, when I'm thinking about what I'm creating, I am now optimizing against that with a different level of understanding. So, Valkyrie, I hope that answered your question in a satisfactory way. Feel free to ask me follow-ups if not.
So while we see if anyone else like poses a question in chat, I'm curious, Melissa, if you'd share a little bit of like, what does your day-to-day look like? Like what do you, I assume you have a team, and can you kind of walk through like, what it's like to work on your team, and where do you begin?
It's a great question. So we begin with scripts. I have a team of 5, which is really small for the amount of work that we do. And we are super collaborative, although we do a specialist within the group. So we try to be as symbiotic as we can in the sense of everybody knowing what's going on and everybody inputting on the creative so that we are getting multiple perspectives and also catching each other's blind spots on certain things within the narrative. But at the same time, I have a team that is designed in order to see things in 360, but execute things in particular areas of expertise. So I have one creative director who is just this impeccable designer. I mean, this man's taste is like beyond. And his house puts mine to shame. I'm like, I feel ashamed every time he comes over. He's amazing. I have an art director who has this incredibly nuanced understanding of our platform and how to leverage the functionality of our platform to serve up the right imagery to evoke, again, that right emotion for the right audience at the right time. And like, that is her superpower. She's amazing. And then I have one person on my team. He's all about the social and digital experience and thinking through the narrative in that respect and how that can come to life. And then I have another woman on my team who is really, along with me, focusing on the visual narrative. And so the AV narrative, right, through the cinematic storytelling of how we want to bring people into the world. And then I partner with an audience insights team that is able to work with me on the fan ethnography. So a lot of what Aaron does and has written books about, of what makes people tick and why within our audiences. And they're also helping us delineate the audience segments. So I start with them from day one on going, what do we think comparative titles are for this story? And then from those comparative titles that we agree on, we start to look at different audience makeups for those titles and how we want to make up the audience for our particular title. And then we read scripts, we pull out themes, we look at what we think is resonating, what might be in the zeitgeist, what we feel like is emotionally sticky for different audiences. And then we also look into what do we think those hooks are going to be. And then we actually do some testing against the hooks. So we have people come and, watch the content or watch the pilot, for example, and we talk to them about what were the things that were most memorable for them, what were the things that felt most emotionally connected, like what pulled them in. And we start to kind of sift through what those hooks are for folks with watching the show. And then from there, I can kind of start to figure out what my creative strategy is. And I can say, okay, I have these people. These are the things that turn them on. These are the behaviors that they're displaying a lot of the time. All right. And now here in my story are all the things that I think are super relevant. Okay. Now I'm going to craft a strategy that allows me to exploit in a good way or manipulate in a good way these different elements of the story in order to elicit this particular behavior. And then that turns into a massive visual brief where I take that strategy and I pull a ton of reference imagery and everything that goes to the tone that I develop for the show. And usually I use like 5 to 10 tone words. You should really try to keep it to 5. Otherwise it can get a little unwieldy and it can get too big and you don't really, know how to bring it back in. And then that tone, along with the visual reference of like how I think the visual language should start to develop, is what I brief different partners with to help bring that to life. I don't have a big enough team where I can bring all of that stuff to life visually internally, but I do bring them the concept and say, okay, like this is what I want to communicate and this is the idea. So for example, Jack Ryan, seasons 1 and 2, right? In season 1, I did a lot of research talking to audiences about this and understanding what it was that was appealing about the character. And it really is that he's this everyman, right? He's this guy that could be the dude next to you at the desk. You could have a beer with him after work, and he's thrown into this extraordinary situation and he rises to the occasion. And what differentiates him from other characters that are CIA people or military characters is that he has this unwavering moral compass, right? So he will not cross certain lines that other characters will. And so we really positioned him as this unexpected hero for season 1. And so then when we did season 2, I was like, well, how do I evolve that archetype of that hero, right? And so in season 1, he was unexpected. He was kind of thrown into the middle of this and he rose to the occasion. Well, I knew the storyline around season 2 was going to be something that challenged that moral line for him, that was really going to push him to the edge. And so I decided to evolve him into this unstoppable hero because he would stop at nothing until he got to the truth. Like that was the through line of the series for season 2. And so right now I'm working on how I'm going to position him in season 3 and evolve that hero archetype yet again, based on what I know is going to happen in the story, which I'm sorry, I can't tell you about. And
so your work turns into then the promos and any type of engagement strategy for fans to engage with, all the marketing around that.
Anything you see that pulls you in to watch the show is my team's responsibility from soup to nuts.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm so glad they're talking to you because I've been wanting them to realize that what they do is not just advertising in an agency space, that there are so many other places that this type of work is happening.
Yeah. And honestly, like I think agencies are really doing some soul searching. Yeah. And trying to figure out like, what is our purpose and how do we approach these things? And, while it is great to be the steward of a brand, that means that you are going to have to become really, really well acquainted with your customers on a level that you never did before. And I think that kind of speaks to Valkyrie's follow-up comment on like slapping pride or a BLM label on something. My personal opinion, I think it all depends on the situation. Context is everything. So I don't have a blanket opinion on people doing that. What is the context? What is the history? And what is the commitment that they're making? And how are they showing you? Again, actions matter, not words. Mm-hmm. So are you going to live that? If you're going to tout it, how are you actually living it? Because that's what people care about. And millennials and younger, they are more interested in what you are actually willing to do in the world than how good your product is. So it's a very different point of view now. And Gen Z, which my son is like the last year of Gen Z, was born in 2010. He's 10 years old now. They just cut through all the noise and they're like, do my friends like it? Okay, cool. Like that's where we're at right now. And by the way, they think YouTubers are their friends. Like 100% think YouTubers are their friends, like in a meaningful way. So,
Ocean has left YouTube communities because he's like, he didn't respond to me, so I'm out.
Yeah, I didn't get my shout out. He didn't recognize the fact that I got him 25 subs. And I mean, some of these micro communities are fascinating.
They are.
But don't tell him I said that because then he'll think that I actually like it. And then we won't have
anything. Then you're watching what he's watching. Don't do that, Mom.
Yeah.
Other questions?
I had a question for Melissa. Hi, Melissa. I'm Shivani. I'm actually in Erin's experimental storytelling class. I'm curious, like hearing about all of your experience, and you have had a lot of experience with marketing and advertising. You've gone to work in entertainment a lot, so I'm curious, what advice do you have to us as students to maybe wanting to break into a different field rather than marketing?
You got to be a little more specific. What is it that you want to do in entertainment?
I guess anything related to like immersive technology, but just how can we, break into different industries other than just advertising and marketing with this background?
I'm going to push you to be even a little bit more specific. So you want to work in immersive entertainment, immersive art? Wait, like what part of immersive is attractive to you?
That's a good
I want to
question.
give you a good answer. That's why I'm putting you on the spot.
So I'm still kind of trying to figure out where specifically I want to, or what industry I want to work in. But I was just asking, since you specifically geared your career towards entertainment, kind of how is in one specific industry, and what tips do you have to a student kind of in a similar boat in terms of kind of breaking into a different industry rather than just going into agency?
I think, it's about having a unique point of view mostly. And I think that's what has allowed me personally to work on client side, on brand side, on agency sides, and even non-marketing. I mean, I've made features, I've made short films, I've made commercials, I've done all kinds of stuff. And, really understanding what it is you want to say. And I will say this, that like, I spent too many years being concerned that what I had to say may not be groundbreaking enough or earth shattering or like, a big enough message that the world would give a shit. And so there's a lot of stuff I didn't create and put out in the world. And I turned 40. And as cliched as it was when I turned 40, that fear that I had that nobody was going to care about what I had to say, or that it wasn't like big enough with all the noise that was out there, flipped to this fear of the fact that I was running out of time and that I wasn't going to get a chance to say it. And I think that really helped me personally crystallize what it was I wanted to say and get past the fear of not wanting to face down what that might be. So my piece of advice is to really do the work on yourself to understand what it is you want to say and what you want to put out in the world, and not to prejudge it or worry about like, if it's going to be received well, or if it has enough meaning, or if it has enough this, but just be really right with what it is you want to say in the world. And I think that there is some magic in that self-certainty when you're creating a piece of art, whether it's immersive or whether it's through advertising or whatever channel you decide to do it, that gets people's attention, because we are all shapeshifters in a lot of ways. That's part of being human. It's a survival mechanism, right? We're always trying on different identities and different elements of our personalities to either fit in or stand out, or there's an objective to all of it, right? To get to where we want to go. And there aren't a lot of people that truly walk around being certain of what that is. And I think those are the people that have that kind of magnetic field, that we're drawn to them and we're pulled in by like what it is they have to say, because we all want to be certain. That's something that existentially, very deeply, we're all looking for, is that certainty. And if you know what that is, people are going to want to hear about it. And that's how you break through the noise. I hope that's helpful. I'm trying not to give you a cop-out answer.
That was a great answer. Thank you.
Okay, Melissa, I think it was awesome, because you're pretty much saying find yourself, right? Find your brand. We talk about this a lot when they're designing their portfolio websites, is like, if any explorer, all of them are my explorers, is what I call them. If they walk out of here with just a bland old portfolio website, I might puke in their face. So, really, I'm looking for them to actually find who they are and share their passion. Because you can see from Melissa's story, she's a storyteller. She grew up telling stories. She loves telling stories. She thinks through story. The narrative is so important. And, and I think that you need to find what makes you passionate. And then it's not immersive. Immersive is like our process. It's like something to be, a way to share it. But what makes you unique that you can go forward with? Don't make me have to throw up on your portfolio website.
Yeah, you don't want that. But look, you guys, you can change too. It doesn't mean that you find that thing and then that's it. You're locked in for the rest of your lives, or that's all you can create. I mean, I'm evolving all the time. Who I am, what I think, what I want. It's just doing the work to figure out what that is. And it's scary and it's uncomfortable and it's messy. And I'm amazed I'm still married after 21 years because of all this, to be honest. But it's really necessary to make something that you feel so strongly about that you can't, double negative on the sentence, but you can't not tell it. You have to tell it. You're compelled. And, it's okay if what you are compelled to tell isn't what everybody's compelled to hear. The fact that you're so compelled to tell it is what people want to hear about. That's what they want to know about. And just through that, then, you make relationships and you meet people and you build a circle that are interested in collaborating with you. And eventually you do find something that really does kind of touch a nerve with people. And you make that and you gain traction, and that builds and builds and builds and builds to how you were able to continue to create experiences for people in the world and, keep going. But look, success, even in Hollywood, even in entertainment, in anything, it's a 20-year overnight success usually. And believe me, Hollywood is a war of attrition. That's really what it is. It's like eventually they turn around and go, oh, you're still here. All right, your turn. I mean, I wish I could tell you it's about being a genius and an auteur. And sometimes the stars align and you get to do that. But a lot of the time it's being able to just grind it out and to wait and to keep making and to keep making. And people go, oh, wow, yeah, you've been doing this for a long time. Oh, yeah, I remember that thing you did. And you're just like, what? You do? Why didn't you say something 8 years ago when I made that piece, And you'll be surprised how many people actually were exposed to it and were paying attention. But the time will be right. And so I don't know how many of you guys know Rick Rubin, the record producer. Amazing. Should be like a guru. But he has this great quote. He said, do the work and the work will do the rest. And it's true.
That's great. Should we take one more question and then I'll give you your time. We're at the hour, so I want to respect Melissa's time for work spending time with us. Any last questions from the class? Speak now, because she's pretty amazing.
Stop it. Okay.
I was just going to say thank you. That was actually really, I took a lot from that. When people talk about their experience.
Kyle, introduce yourself first.
Oh, yeah. Hi, I'm Kyle. I've known Erin for, I don't know, maybe a year and a half now. I've taken 3 classes with her. And have totally changed as a person. So I'm trying to find myself still, but I think I'm getting there.
Melissa, he's going to go work for NASA.
Awesome.
Yeah, but I just
guy.
wanted to say that I appreciate what you had to say. A lot of times when people talk about their experiences, it's hard to relate to them, but I related to you. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Kyle. You're welcome. I'm glad. I hope it's useful. I'm going to put my email in the chat. Feel free to, I promise I will answer your email. It may not be right away because I'm really bad at that, but if you have questions, please feel free to email me.
So a connection that I have to share this with you, Melissa, but I forgot you worked for Crispin. I know we've talked about this before, but talk about small world and soul searching in regards to agency. I don't know if you know this or not, but the founders actually did soul searching and realized like some of the things that they made were not about media, like weren't really good in regards to media literacy. So last year, they donated their entire agency to redo the entire branding and put out a public campaign for the National Association for Media Literacy Education that I'm a part of. And I was like, I heard you say that. I'm like, oh my God, they just did Media Monsters for us. I'm going to put their website on there. Yeah. So this website I just posted, they redid the whole thing for us.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, I love Chuck Porter. He's an amazing human. Yeah.
He had like a come to Jesus moment and said, I need to fix this.
That's wild. So cool. Well, you've met Annie, his daughter, at parties at my house.
Oh, no way. Really? Wow. Yeah. Oh my God. I'm putting two and two together. This is crazy.
Yeah. And she runs all of production internally for Facebook and Instagram right now.
Ah, that's so cool. Wow. Wow.
She's awesome. We met at Saatchi. She is
awesome. I remember meeting her at your party, and her dad is pretty awesome. They've done such amazing work.
He's a good human.
Work. Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Can we give a round of applause and a high five for Melissa? And you're welcome back anytime. Permanent explorer with me, Melissa.
Thank you. I'm very flattered. It was good to meet you guys. Thanks for listening to me babble for an hour.